Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us. While most Americans bleed their savings accounts dry under this Biden economy, the rich are getting richer, the powerful elites are getting more powerful, and the politicians are trading stock like it's going out of style. Nancy Pelosi, let's take her for example. She's perhaps one of the most prolific stock traders in Congress. According to the Daily Mail, Pelosi has a staggering estimated net worth of about $250 million. According to Quiver Quant data, she has traded nearly $4 million worth of stocks this year alone, and since 2020, she's traded just around $100 million. Much of that has been in tech companies that reside inside of her home district of San Francisco. Over on the Republican side, things aren't much better. This week, it's being reported that Republican Congressman Anthony D'Esposito paid a mistress and a fiancée's daughter with taxpayer funds. The report states that after taking the oath of office, the first-term congressman hired his lifelong fiancée's daughter to work as a special assistant in his district office, eventually bumping her salary to about $3,800 a month, this according to payroll records. In April of that year, D'Esposito added someone even closer to his payroll, a woman with whom he was having an affair with, according to 4 people familiar with the relationship. The woman, Devin Foss, she collected about $2,000 a month for a part-time job in that same district office. Each working agreement abruptly ended in July of 2023. This, of course, coinciding with D'Esposito's fiancée, Cynthia Lark, learning about his relationship with Foss, his mistress. Despite dating Foss, who was 38 years old, D'Esposito lived with his fiancée Lark, with whom he had been engaged to since around 2010, and whose daughter Tessa Lark had also been hired onto the congressional staff. That seems like a lot of nepotism to me. Our guest today is someone you know very well on the show. He's a former congressman from Long Island, and he knows a lot about what goes on Capitol Hill, both on the scene and behind the scenes. George Santos is our guest today. I asked him to join us to discuss all that's going on Capitol Hill, including the latest allegations against Rino Congressman Anthony D'Esposito. For all of you, you guys may remember, D'Esposito was vehemently against having George Santos in Congress, saying he posed a big threat and it left a stain on democracy. Well, now D'Esposito, I think, has an issue of his own. George, thanks so much for joining us today on the Great America Show. The news of the day, Congressman Anthony D'Esposito caught in, we'll call it a pickle, I guess you could say, hiring his mistress and his fiance's daughter on his payroll from the first day as a congressman. I want to play for the audience before I get your reaction. Anthony D'Esposito talking about you when he wanted you thrown out of Congress. Take a listen.
The American people expect us to do the right thing. The American people are watching for us to do the right thing. And if we have an opportunity in this great institution to start a new precedent, one, that means we hold members of the House of Representatives to a higher standard. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty confident that the American people would applaud that. I'm pretty confident that the American people expect that. And I hope that tomorrow, in this great chamber, we set that precedent, Mr. Speaker. We set a precedent that we, as members of America's oldest institution, are held to a higher standard.
I understand it, George. So he wanted you gone. I don't know. Tell me first, what did you do to break Anthony D'Esposito's heart?
Well, here's the problem, John. The whole thing stems from this weird little boys club in the local GOP in New York. I was never part of it. I was very much an outsider, right? So at the first opportunity, and I'm going to go back to Election Day 2022, the next day I went to do this press conference with them. The chairman looked me in the eye and said, "Holy crap, kid, you did it. A lot of people have called me like, how did he do it? How is this possible? Who is he?" The reality is they never could understand how the hell I pulled it off. I worked. Anthony was handed the seat through, whichever way you want to look at this. But it's so rich looking at him say this now, knowing that at that very exact moment, he was defrauding the American people, violating nepotism laws, hiring and paying for his guma. The inflation situation has gotten so bad.
Hold on 1 second. For our non-Italian listeners, can you tell them what a guma is?
A guma is, the side chick. So let's just put it this way. Inflation has become so bad and the economy in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's America is in such deep crisis that even your mistresses now have to do 2 jobs.
So this is the thing that's so alarming to me. He was one of the biggest mudslingers at you. I mean, it was like you did something. It's like you kicked his dog, George. And I mean, granted, you went there and you wanted to get stuff done. And, I've worked for congressmen before. If you go there to get things done, you have a target on your back right away because you disrupted the status quo. But from day one, it's a fact that Anthony D'Esposito was paying his, as a special assistant, his fiance's daughter, $3,800 a month. Now, I worked in Capitol Hill. When I worked in Capitol Hill, there wasn't full-time employees barely making that. Now, you had to rent a place in Washington, D.C., making $3,800 a month, maybe even less in some offices because not every office pays the same. And you got to pay. Now, this is his daughter, his fiance's daughter, who's living probably at home with her mother, making $3,800 a month. Now, the Gumad was making $2,000 a month. I think it's the New York Post reported each working agreement ended abruptly in July of 2023, coinciding with D'Esposito's fiancée, Cynthia Lark, learning about his relationship with the mistress. I mean, how does this even come about? Why would D'Esposito put himself in that place in the first place where he knew he's got his Gumad on the side? He knows he's violating nepotism laws by hiring these 2 people to come after you. That's the thing that's like, it doesn't resonate in my mind, George.
Hypocrisy. These guys are the poster child for hypocrisy. The Nassau County, the Suffolk County Republican parties on Long Island, New York, are arguably the most corrupt GOP establishments and machines in America. There's a reason we have had several federal investigations into former elected officials all across Long Island. It's because they are absolutely reprehensible. I too can say I felt astray. I fell in astray and got a little too involved and allowed my better judgment to be skewed by the sheer insanity of the dirt and grime. You want to say Washington, D.C. is a swamp? The real deep swamp runs through Long Island's GOP circles.
And George, that's the case everywhere. Where I'm at in Staten Island, New York, it's the Richmond County GOP. It's the same way. If you're from the outside, they want nothing to do with you. You got to budge your way in. And if you get in, you're still never accepted. It's called the Boys Club out here in Staten Island. You have your certain people. My Congresswoman's Nicole Malliotakis. She's a total rhino, but she was next up in line. And it's just the way things go. So if you want to get in, I mean, you got to have a lot of money. Or you got to have someone willing to back your campaign with a lot of money. You did it the hard way, man. You went out there, you busted your butt, you knocked on doors, which a lot of people don't do anymore. D'Esposito, I can guarantee you wasn't doing half the work you were doing. People don't understand what it's like working for a member of Congress or someone running for Congress. You hit thousands and thousands and thousands of people's doors. You've got to go out there and you've got to ask people to chip in anywhere from $20 to $2,700 to your campaign. It's not an easy job, but when it's given to you right in your lap, I think it's a lot easier and you don't respect it as much. D'Esposito, another thing I took issue with him, due process. He said you don't deserve due process because the facts are the facts. Take a listen.
I first want to point out that constitutional due process doesn't apply here. We have the facts. They've been outlined over the last 10 months. And the facts are that Mr. Santos actually admitted to those lies and deceptions. He references the concern of this body and the fact that we, quote, may be losing trust. I want to let everyone in on a stark reminder. Coming from New York, New Yorkers don't agree on much of anything. But 78% of the individuals who live in the 3rd Congressional District do not want George Santos as their representative. So it seems to me that trust has already been lost.
They had to do a poll, George, to figure out that they didn't want you anymore. This guy's got what I'll call George Santos derangement syndrome.
Let me tell you something. Well, that's actually funny. But the thing is, here's the most disingenuous part about that statement. He was in October making the argument, in November, making the argument for a poll that was done in the second week of January. by Newsday, of all institutions, which we know have a very skewed liberal leaning. Our internal polling did not show a 78% rejection. Our internal polling didn't show a 50% rate rejection. And again, what I try to tell people is very simple. They took whatever they could and they put it together and stuck. Let me tell you a really quick story, 30 seconds, about insane they are. Okay, John, in the ethics complaint, it said that I had sexually assaulted a potential staffer. In the investigation, I was exonerated of that because there was no proof, nor it was unsubstantiated slander. Words in the investigation. In the expulsion resolution that Michael Guest, the chairman of the ethics committee, put forward, he said that I had engaged in sexual harassment. It is so backwards. It is so upside down and back-ass words that these people can't even tell Adam from Bob and Bill from John because they don't know what they're doing. They're sloppy. The American people is not their priority. The ethics committee has become an absolute smear committee and weaponized by whoever wants to weaponize it against whoever they deem politically expedient. In my case, it was me.
Yep. And you know, they have their certain people they want to go after. They actually had a bone to pick with you because you beat out somebody who was a career politician. You went out there and you busted your ass, like I said. So they had a bone to pick with you because you weren't one of them. You didn't go along to get along, but they were so fast to get you out of there, George, with no due process. This was before you pled guilty to anything. You were just indicted. Everyone deserves the presumption of innocence until guilty. You weren't given any of that. You were guilty before pleading guilty. They put the pressure on you. They step on the back of your neck and say, you're going to do this or do that. Mike Johnson doesn't have a damn backbone in his body. That guy is as feckless as they come. I want to take a quick break here. We're going to take up Johnson on the other side of this break because since day one he's gotten there, the man has just been a total liar. I thought Kevin McCarthy was bad. This guy's 10 times worse. We're talking with George Santos. We're coming right back. Folks, are you tired of supporting big box stores and multi-billion-dollar corporations that don't support us? Corporations that donate tens of millions of dollars a year to push woke Marxist Dem ideologies? Whether it be Amazon and Jeff Bezos or Target with their transgender clothing for kids, or even Bud Light going totally woke, enough is enough. Why should we as lovers of this country continue to support these corporations? The answer is we shouldn't. I constantly get people who reach out to me and ask, John, what can we do to save this country? Where can we shop and support American-made brands and conservative ideologies? Well, we now have a solution to stop shopping at these woke companies and stop funding the deep state and a solution to buy American. This is something we can all do right now to kick the deep state in the teeth and stop funding our enemies and vote with our dollars. We have a parallel economy for around 450 household products. Not only can you cancel woke brands like Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson, you can also cancel the stores that carry them. I need you all to head over to switchwithjohn.com, that's switchwithjohn.com, where you can read all about our movement. We have access to a conservative manufacturer that will replace these brands and the stores you buy them from. It isn't an additional budget item because instead of turning right into Target or left into Walmart, you're going to shop directly online, directly with the manufacturer. Folks, this is a patriot movement that is happening right now before our eyes. Every 47 seconds, a shopper is switching to our online store, and we need you to partner with us, join us, and band together. I just canceled my Amazon Prime subscription because I've truly had enough. So what do you say? It's time to put your money where your heart is? Join us today and help save this nation. Go to switchwithjohn.com. That's switchwithjohn.com to learn how you can join thousands of other patriots and help take this nation back. switchwithjohn.com. We'll see you there. We're back. We're talking with George Santos. George, real quick, I just want to ask you where you're at right now in your case as you fight against the DOJ and the charges against you. If you want to just give the audience an update.
Well, John, look, after a very long, year and a half, I think it's fair to say that we've come to a conclusion almost. The fight's over. I've taken responsibility for the things I've done. I deeply regret them. There's not a day that goes by that I don't live in remorse and regret for what happened in the past and what I've allowed myself to morally escape my own values in the name of ambition. And I think it's very important to make sure that the American people know you can fight, but you have to realize when it's your time to just throw the towel in. And now I'm just moving forward with the process. And in February, I have a court date, and it's in God's hands at this point.
Yeah, I just
and a federal judge that's overlooking the case, right?
Oh God. Well, we've seen what these people do with January 6th, so I hope you don't have one of those guys. At the end of the day,
I've been given a very fair process. I can sit here and be an absolute a-hole and say I haven't, but I have been given a very fair process. Judge, DOJ, FBI. It is what it is.
Yeah. George, we're humans. I'd say 100% of us are imperfect. We've all made mistakes in our lives. At the end of the day, you own up and you own it and you face the consequences. But, like I said in the last segment, for someone like Anthony D'Esposito to be sitting there judging you while he was doing just as bad, if not worse, at the same damn time while he's judging you, at the end of the day, I think only God can judge us. That means something. But for that idiot to be sitting there, that Rino idiot to be sitting there, and I'd said something to you before we started here. You could usually tell when somebody did something wrong, Republican, because they usually start to get very close to Donald Trump. He's a big Rino, doesn't like Trump, can't stand Trump. But in the last few weeks, George, wouldn't you say, D'Esposito's been this MAGA boy?
Well, when you get a call from somebody from the New York Times and they land you, and I know what those calls are like, and I know what those emails look like. So when you're getting a call in an email with bullet point questions and the email scrolls on and on and on, all of a sudden you have a come to Jesus moment and you become MAGA. It's amazing. Here's the deal. I've been consistent. I've supported Donald Trump since the moment he came down those escalators. I have my MAGA accolades enough to prove and back me as a true America First individual. My voting record in the House of Representatives, 96.3%. 96.33%. If you compare that to my former colleagues, Anthony D'Esposito, Nick LaLota, Andrew Garbarino, Mike Lawler, Mark Molinaro, Nicole Malliotakis, I mean, you would think we live in two different planets on how we vote. And
George, you just gave me agita.
Well, I give myself agita when I say these things. New York
every single one of those people you listed, George, gets progressively worse as you go on in the list. They're terrible. The New York delegation, I understand New York is like, you got to be somewhere in the middle because,
No, you don't. No, you don't.
For some of these people to get elected, like Trump has said with abortion, we're in an election season, a very critical election. Maybe there's some things you lay back on and you take an easier approach. You just don't talk about it. These guys, George, they don't do that. They're to the core actual Democrats.
So essentially, elections are a pass for them to speak from both sides of their mouth. I got elected in a. So let me give you this, John. I got elected in a D+5 Democrat seat that Joe Biden won by 9 points. I swung it and won it by 8.5 points. And guess what? I called abortion for what it was. Barbaric. I'm anti-abortion. I don't believe in a national ban. I believe there should be abortion available, but they should be rare, safe at all times. Legal, rare, and safe. But the problem is that a lot of my colleagues want to say they're pro-life and then they go on to vote for pro-choice and they get demolished by lists by organizations like Susan's List and the pro-life organizations out there. So it's no, you can do it. You can do it if you're consistent. People respect consistency in America. That's what they do.
Yeah, and the New York delegation has been nothing but the Trump tax cuts. They went against Trump tax cuts because of the SALT deduction. Well, guess what? If you live in New York City, you could blame your Marxist Democrat lawmakers and your people up in the New York Senate and the people in the city council and your mayors and your governors for your tax problems. It's not the federal government. For them voting against the Trump tax cuts because of the SALT deduction, well, screw you. There's 49 other states in this country that, deal with it. New York, too bad. You suck it up. But these guys are showed up.
John, I did introduce the 118th Congress's first SALT tax repeal act.
Excellent.
So I'm just gonna go on and say I have an opinion on the SALT deduction cuts from the Trump tax cuts, and I think it was called reprisal to all of his critics. And I'm here for it, but in reality, it does hurt a lot of New Yorkers disproportionately. And we do need to fix it. And I think Trump himself has admitted that and said it at the rally in the Nassau County Coliseum, that he will be addressing and raising the threshold and the caps.
I agree with you on 100%, George. But when you have the largest tax cuts put in front of you in American history, right, and you're sitting back on it,
some things fall through the cracks.
Right. It's exactly what it is. You mentioned MAGA, someone who's obviously not MAGA, Mike Johnson. I mean, the guy has been, George, a rhino from the beginning. I was with Lou, some of the first people to call for Kevin McCarthy to resign. We put the hammer down, and we had members of Congress calling us, off the record, cheering us on, thanking us for what we were doing, because we thought, George, we were going to get a better leader than what we have now in Mike Johnson. I mean, did you ever think in your worst dream that Mike Johnson would be this big of a damn rhino?
So let me fill you in a little story. I was against Kevin McCarthy getting ousted and vacated because I knew whatever would come after would be far worse.
Right, and there were a lot of people.
Kevin, look, I'll put it this way. People thinking that Jim Jordan would be the savior. I like Jim. Jim wouldn't be very much different than what you're seeing now. The only difference is Kevin McCarthy had the institutional fortitude to actually negotiate something. Even though sometimes he did surrender, we did win something within that surrender. Mike Johnson just surrenders and we win nothing. Democrats win everything. So let me put it this way to you. Right. When we were looking for another speaker and Scalise had failed and Emmer had failed and Jim Jordan failed and then Emmer failed, I was every single time one of them failed, I would walk up to Mike Johnson and say, Mike, you need to run. He's like, I could never do it. Mike, you need to run. He's like, I look at Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise as my biggest mentors and friends, and they're like big brothers to me.
You're to blame for this whole mess, George.
I will say I take full responsibility for the fact that I egged him on long enough that the day he decided to announce, I got a text from him at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, George, I've prayed and I wanted to thank you for encouraging me to run. I'm doing it. And when he did that, I knew he was going to get a consensus because Mike was somebody we all liked. I sought out Mike for counsel many times in the House for in-depth, knowledgeable counsel. And he was a good man. This is not the Mike Johnson I knew. This is not the Mike Johnson I supported for Speaker. And I was so proud to introduce to thousands of people on X, on Spaces, currently night after night, talking him up and introducing him to the American people. This Mike Johnson is an absolute surrender and a letdown for me and for many Americans.
I want to take one more quick break here, George, and I want to continue this conversation about Mike Johnson because it doesn't make sense what he's doing. It really, there's no rhyme or reason to it on why he's doing it. This latest government shutdown coming up in just, I think, 6 days now, and he looks like he's ready to cave to the Democrats once again. I want to take a quick break. We're coming back with George Santos. Stay with us.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution, one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
We're back. We're talking with George Santos. George, the budget, government shutdown looming in 6 days. Mike Johnson scrapping the SAVE Act, which President Trump vehemently has asked stay in any sort of continuing resolution that gets passed to ensure that we have the safest possible election we can have with everything that's, put into the mixture of things. Johnson now looking to push through what he calls a clean CR. There's no such thing as a clean CR. He says we're not going to push through a Christmas omnibus, which is BS because all of Nancy Pelosi's stuff is still going to be in this bill. The only thing these people care about, George, is getting through a defense bill so that the war hawks and the warmongers get their money and the military industrial complex. And if you don't believe me, go look at Halliburton stock, George, over the last 6 months. Go look at Lockheed Martin stock over the last 6 months. It's straight up. It's straight up because they knew a defense bill was coming. They knew that we're going to go ahead and spend more money on wars in Ukraine and over in Israel and everywhere else in the world that we need to spend money. Your thoughts?
Look, I think you outlined it perfectly, but here's the reality. It's a slush fund. All the lobbyists that are lining the pockets of Republicans and Democrats alike are always coming in with their cattle call. It's like church. When the basket comes around, well, that is what a CR is. America, there is a massive divorce, and I write weekly opinions for the South Shore Press here on Long Island, and you can see my opinions. And I wrote a very extensive explanatory opinion on the CR and what CRs are and how they are a absolute divorce from the oath to office that every single one of those representatives takes every time they're reelected by upholding the Constitution and their obligation to passing 12 spending bills. They have not done that in over a decade. And it is an absolute departure from what our frameworkers and our founding fathers had envisioned for this great constitutional republic to be about. So in reality, CRs, ladies and gentlemen, are nothing more than you being sold out to the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. and the establishment, all in exchange for laundered taxpayer dollars to go to these different companies and then trickle right back as campaign contributions for Democrats and Republicans alike. That's why I'm proud to say I took $0 from lobbyists.
Yeah. And you know what the problem is? And one of my favorite congressmen is Tim Burchett. Every time I get on, I mean,
he was my mentor.
Tim gets on here. He gets on and he'll say, "Oh, we're just a bunch of shit bums. I don't know what you want us to do. You got to start holding us accountable." And he's right, because nobody holds these people accountable at the ballot box. Because like we spoke about before, George, there's a boys club and there's a girls club, and you cannot get in it. And people don't understand, like when Tim says things like that, where you hold them accountable. Okay, well, how do you hold them accountable? You primary them. How do you primary someone who's got $1 million in the bank, $1 million war chest, and then they're going to come after you more with the local GOPs out on Long Island, out in Richmond County? There's really no holding them accountable. So these people get away with it. And these Republicans always say you're a bad person if you primary somebody because you make them spend all their money. Well, I was part of a primary, George, in 2019 out here in Staten Island, where we made the opposition spend $1 million. And you know what? He spent $1 million in the primary, and he lost in the general in November to a Democrat, because we opened the voters' eyes up to what happened. So you had a Democrat for one term, and now we have another Republican back. And now she's not a Republican. It's Nicole Maliotakis. But that was vote in action, because we held him accountable. We exposed everything this man did, and his name was Dan Donovan, all the Rino stances he's taken. And we had a Democrat for one cycle. But, George, at the end of the day,
well, you had a tiny Democrat.
Right. Mighty Max Rose.
Mighty Max Rose. He's a little Democrat. It was puny, tiny. You could barely see him. That's the reality. I'll say this. Look, Dan Donovan, for all of his flaws, really gave us a bad name when he started with we can't live on $174,000. Right. I sleep in my couch in my office. How embarrassing. You're making $174,000 and you're complaining about the way of life. How about Americans who live on $30,000 a year?
Right, George, the median household income in America is like 50 or 60 grand. Household.
But he was making $174,000 plus whatever his spouse was making, and he couldn't make ends meet. It's so embarrassing and so out of touch. Politicians are so out of touch with the American people. It's offensive to me. It's absolute downright offensive. Let me tell you, I did just fine living in New York City and Washington, D.C. with $174,000. It's just about knowing how to manage your finances. Clearly, I knew how to manage mine, and they don't know how to manage theirs.
Yeah, and you know what? These guys, Dan Donovan, what he didn't mention is he's got like 2 pensions, one from being a judge, one from being a district attorney. His wife's a very successful attorney. He lives in like $1.5 million house out here on Staten Island. It's just always a money grab. The last people in the world who deserve a raise, George, are politicians. I mean, these people are the scum of the scum, the lowest forms of life. I'm going to give you an example of one. Nancy Pelosi's husband sold more than $500,000 worth of Visa stock just weeks before the DOJ filed an antitrust lawsuit against Visa. I mean, it's unbelievable. The lawsuit is alleging that Visa has illegally monopolized the debit card market over the course of many years. How does Nancy Pelosi's husband know that it's time for him to sell his Visa stock. What people don't realize, George, you mentioned the $174,000. Nancy Pelosi, according to the Daily Mail, is worth $250 million. Why is Nancy Pelosi hanging around traveling? People don't realize, George, you have to travel to D.C. every week. If you live in Staten Island, it's an hour-long, 2-hour-long train ride or a half-hour flight. If you live in San Francisco, it's a 5 or 6 hour flight that you're doing twice a week. Why is Nancy Pelosi doing that, George, for $174,000 a year?
Well, and that's 70 years old or 80 years old. I don't know how old she is, right? So yeah, no, it's very telling. The problem is power. Look, Nancy Pelosi is not a traitor or a wizard. Neither is Paul Pelosi. The reality is it's very simple. Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi have the most consequential pillow talk in America. Think about that pillow talk at night, right? John, you might sleep
more pillow talk than Mike Lindell, some would say.
I mean, I would say Mike Lindell should give her some pillows because that's a whole lot of talking and that's a lot of pressure on your neck. But think about it this way. While every American lays down at night to have pillow talk about, honey, I'm worried about the bills at the end of the month, the electricity costs, or they're sacrificing the quality of their lives so that they can just get by. Nancy Pelosi is sleeping and is having pillow talk about what bills and what's happening in government, that how can it affect their finances. And that's why you see this grotesque, visible insider trading habits that are very hard to escape the allegations that Nancy Pelosi has faced now for many years because of the CHIPS Acts and the chip buys and Raytheon and Boeing and every single other military industrial complex type company that has benefited from the legislation of war. So Nancy Pelosi has the most consequential and expensive pillow talk in America, while we're all having pillow talk about how we're going to keep the lights on and the roof over our heads.
You're absolutely, to put in perspective, since 2020, she's done just under $100 million in trade, George. $100 million. That's money that like 99% of Americans will never see in their lifetime, or 10 lifetimes added up. It's truly disgusting. I have an idea. If these people in Congress don't want to ban trading, right? Because it's clearly, this should be an up and down vote, as you guys call it there. That should be.
If it hit the floor, it would pass. If it hit the floor, it would pass. The problem
but it
is
never will.
The people that can put it on the floor are in on it, so they won't put it on the floor.
Right.
That's the problem. You need to look at leadership on both sides of the aisle and hold them accountable.
George, I mean, that's exactly what we're doing here today. I have a problem with Republicans just as much as Democrats, which is the top of our conversation to start this. But if they don't want to ban trading, I have another idea, and we'll see if this can hit the floor, George. You guys who are in Congress, or anyone in Congress, you have 30 days. You have to report your trades within 30 days. Anyone who's a stock trader or a hedge fund guy knows that after about 10 minutes, stock information's no good anymore, right? Once it hits the market, everyone's, paraded the Bloomberg terminal things because you get an extra 10 seconds of trading time. That's how, crucial timing is in the trading market. Why don't we make it so that if you want to make a trade, you have to report it before you make the trade and then go make the trade? I think it'll level the playing field for the American people, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think it's fair. The problem is that they have 30 days regardless, even if they were to report it prior to, right? Because of the processing and the bureaucracy. The reality is there's no way to curtail it. And in plain put, simple English, if Americans don't get to play the same game of insider trading, neither should politicians. The great example of that was Nicole Malio's stock tips when she did a very lucky, suspicious trade on New York Community Bank stocks versus Signature on the eve of the collapse of Signature Bank. By the way, after the Ways and Means Committee had been officially notified that they would be shutting doors arbitrarily and out of the blue the very next day. And guess who goes and suspiciously buys all these stocks on New York Community? The stock ticker used to be NYCB. She goes and buys all this stock for NYCB randomly on the eve of the collapse in M&A, the merger and acquisition of Signature Bank. That is criminal behavior. It's not hard to prove. Obviously, you need to be able to investigate this, and I think it should be, not just for Nicole. Nicole is puny, just like her predecessor. She's puny in the greater scheme of things. But here's something I will say to you, John. I think it's very simple. Let's just go back to constitutional serve. No salaries for members of Congress. You know why? You will only attract and you will only recruit the most talented, patriotic people who actually want to serve this country. Because ever since it's been turned into a career, it has become abysmal, and the country has been sold out for their own personal interest while Americans are suffering. That is why we have a 36 trillion dollar debt right now and counting, because politicians expected somebody like me to vote on a suspension of the debt ceiling last year. Absolutely, I voted against that. Absolutely, I voted against every CR. Absolutely, I voted against every spending bill. Do you know why? Until you put a plan and you're forced to budget like every American is forced to budget today, I would have never voted. I'm glad, and I sleep well at night knowing that I never cost the American people a penny towards this abysmal budget that we have.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is fiscal responsibility. These people spend our money, our federal government's money, like it means nothing. Even getting rid of salaries for these people, it wouldn't matter. Like I said before, I think Nancy Pelosi's going there for $174,000 a year when she's done $100 million in trades since 2020. I remember the Nicole Maliotakis thing. It's funny. My father was in banking at the time, a very high up executive, and his bank, I think, was being sold at the time, or portioned off, or whatever it was, sold. And he'd come by after we saw that story, and he said, how the hell did she know that was happening? I had no idea. And we're going through this right now. We had no idea. So it's funny, but it doesn't matter.
We get notified in Congress, and she serves
on
the Ways and Means Committee. They have a lot of privileged access and confidential access that not every member has. She happens to sit on that committee. Notice how her stock trade habits changed once she joined the committee. Here's what I'll say, John. Here's a novel thought. Every 2 years, if Congress fails to balance a budget and pass 12 individual spending bills, every single member of Congress is ineligible for re-election. Imagine if we pass that.
You know what? And may you couple that with taking the salary away, because taking the salary away from somebody like Maliotakis would hurt. She's never had a
maybe you don't take the salary away. You just put that responsibility at that threshold. If this Congress is unable to balance a budget and pass 12 individual spending bills and come through with their constitutional oath and their oath to office, you're ineligible. You're ineligible for re-election.
It's not a bad idea, George.
The game. No,
it's not a bad idea, because a lot of these people have never held real jobs in their lives, right? They've never known what it's like to work in the private sector. All they know is working their local city council, and then they get term limited out. Then they go to their local Senate. They get term limited out. Maybe they go become a mayor. They get term limited out. And then they go to Congress until they're 150 years old. And then they die there. And it's literally, George, it's a recipe, the same one that all these people follow. I want to wrap up with a few things here, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, because I think the audience is going to enjoy this greatly. Speaking of the pot calling the kettle black, and I think this story fits perfectly. This week, U.S. Capitol was hit by a large-scale dark web cyber attack. Passwords leaked through staffers signing up for, quote, adult websites and dating apps, George. What's going on Capitol Hill?
Well, remember earlier this year when everybody was talking about that very obnoxious and disturbing image that came out of the Senate hearing room with the staffer having explicit sexual activities with another male inside of on top of Amy Klobuchar's chair. So this is very common.
Confirmation room, I think, right?
Yep. This is very common practice on Capitol Hill. I don't know from when your time you were there, but very early on, as soon as I got on the Hill, I discovered that it's essentially a Sodom and Gomorrah. It is absolutely dirty, putrid. The sex cult and culture has dominated. And when Madison Cawthorn said the famous words that they had cocaine sex orgies, he was not lying. He was telling the truth. And I say that, and you can take my word for what it is, or you don't need to trust me. But believe me when I tell you, he was not lying.
He had mentioned my time there. It's funny. I worked for a man that we both know very well, Chris Grant. And I was so scared. This man's probably about 6'6", big guy. Every time I walk past Chris, too. George, I'm 6'1". I'm a big boy. And I used to walk past Chris, and I'd be like,
and so I would and demure.
George, I didn't think twice about looking the wrong way or doing the wrong thing, because I was so terrified of Chris. Such a good guy. Big Dog Strategies. He runs a very successful political consulting firm for anyone looking to run for office. It's Big Dog Strategies. I want to wrap up with this. We're both New Yorkers. It seems everyone around Mayor Eric Adams has begun to fall. Police commissioner resigned. You got a new one in for 10 days. His house has now since been raided by the FBI. Everyone around Mayor Adams is falling. They're alleging he has ties to Turkey. As a man who's been under investigation himself, George, do you think the house of cards is starting to fall for Mayor Adams? It's almost impossible for everyone around you to fall without, the statue eventually falling. What do you think's going on with Mayor Adams?
The reality is the foundation has started to crumble, and pretty soon the foundation upholding him is going to fall. Therefore, he will fall. The reality is when even a Monsignor is caught up in an embroiled political scandal like this and corruption scandal in the Brooklyn diocese, I think that's very telling. The reality is Mayor Adams is going to have a very, very long road ahead of him when it comes to these investigations. For everything that we're seeing reported, allegations, and as I speak with sources on the ground, the reality is the mayor is soon to be caught up and have his own charges presented against him if everything pans out to be the way it seems to be. Because there's no way you're telling the American people that his entire financial operation gets indicted, but he doesn't know anything about it. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And wait until they start pulling and looking at the contracts for the real estate developers in New York City, which I know he's very cozy with because I know a lot of the players. And Mayor Adams bragged about a lot of these charter school licenses and a lot of these big buildings and garages and hotel conversions into temporary homeless shelters. You name it. Mayor Adams has his finger on a lot of these things. There's a lot of play to play. And I think his time I think his goose is about to be just well done pretty soon.
Hey, the thing, George, people don't realize is when you're surrounding this man and you're looking at, and the DOJ comes to you and says, well, it's 10 years for this, 10 years for that, 20 for this, 30 for that. And before you know it, you're looking at 80 years. But if you want a rat, maybe we can get you like community service. Damn well those guys are going to start squealing and squealing and squealing because they don't know anything.
Oh, they'll sing like Yellow Canaries.
Absolutely true. George Santos, thanks for everything, man. I appreciate it. We hope your case goes, as well as possible. And, like you said, you take responsibility for what happened, and we move forward from there. You get the last word here, George.
Well, John, thank you for having me. And like I said earlier, life is about a path, and we all meet our own paths, and we have to walk it. I'm walking mine. I appreciate you for the time. I appreciate for the fun and candor in the conversation. But the reality is, hey, when push comes to shove, own up, fess up, move on, and be a better person. So thank you for having me.
We're human beings, George. You take responsibility, and, when we reap the consequences from God. Anthony D'Esposito, it's time for you to admit what you did wrong and come forward. Don't be a coward. The truth will
set you free.
You heard from George Santos. George, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us today. And a reminder, due to the high demand of all you listeners who signed up to switchwithjohn.com, I now need a few of you to join my team and help out with this project. If you're looking for remote work and an additional stream of income, join me on a Zoom call this Friday to learn all about it. This Friday, September 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to host a Zoom to see if this project may be right for you. The basic qualifications are easy, 18 years old, and decent with technology on the computer. I need you to register at patriotsdirect.com. That's Patriots with an S, Patriots direct.com, patriotsdirect.com. Every dollar isn't going as far as it used to, so I'm praying this is an answer to some of your prayers. Come find out this Friday, September 27th. Register at patriotsdirect.com. I'll be there as well, so I look forward to seeing you all on that Zoom. Please be sure to join us back here tomorrow for the Great America Show as our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. Please be sure to follow me on Twitter at John Fawcett NY. That's John Fawcett NY. And on Truth Social at John Fawcett. Shoot me a tweet. Let me know what you want to hear more of on this show. You can also email us at info@loudobbs.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow. May God bless you. May God bless America. And may God bless the great Lou Dobbs.